I'm with JR Sloan, the Arizona CIO. JR, thanks so much for taking the time.
Great to be here.
And Joe Bielawski, the President of Knowledge Services. Joe, thank you as well for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Now, you both also are the co-founders of the StateRAMP program. If folks are unfamiliar with StateRAMP, obviously it's building off the federal enterprise risk management program around cloud security. So let's start with the beginning. StateRAMP has been around for a few years. Give me an update. Maybe JR, lead us off with what does StateRAMP look like today compared to maybe just a few years ago?
Well, I think StateRAMP is really starting to fill out the vision that we had for it from day one, which is starting to create that critical mass of suppliers that have come together, that have gone through the security assessment process, and now providing, I'll say, leveraging that certify once, use many times credential, right? So the value from the supplier standpoint is similar to the FedRAMP program in that it's now recognized, I think, credential among many states. And so we're seeing increased adoption from a state level. So that tells me that the states are seeing value in the program, which is I'll say there are two objectives, right? We're trying to serve both the private sector providers that know they want to bring a secure solution. States, we know that there's a shared responsibility as we consume these cloud provider services. And so we both are interested then in saying, how do we properly steward and protect the data, which is really, at the end of the day, the thing we got to do.
It's interesting you brought up the increased adoption, see value. Last time I think I looked into this, correct me if I'm wrong, 24 maybe, 25, 26 states have gone all in.
Yep.
And then there's some states that are StateRAMP adjacent. I know there's some. We won't bring up the Texas ramp. Oh, we did. But you get my point that there's some people who are saying, okay, this is a great idea. Let's be adjacent. What does that tell you about the need for this cloud security? What's it tell you? Because I remember early on, every state was so different, and every state was like, oh, we're each our own snowflake, and that made companies harder to sell. For them to sell to states.
So a couple things. One is, I think even you look at the adjacent programs. So like, Texas, so having TexRAMP, that was part of the legislation that got passed. But at the end of the day, the program that they're using is very, very similar, right? So I mean, there's I would say near 100% overlap. And I think every state also has to have, I'll say, call it a relief valve, which is if there's a need from a procurement standpoint to get a supplier and a solution through a review process that would take longer, even through a partner like StateRAMP, it gives we have to have a backstop. So I think states still need to have a process that they can go to, but I think everyone has recognized that the time, the effort, the expense to properly staff and deliver the assessment and continuous monitoring that comes through StateRAMP, it's a great value for the states.
And I would add to that the collaboration that exists between not only, in this case, Texas or Arizona or other states that have a variation of their RAMP program, but also the NASPOs and NASIOs of the world, because it is that organizational collection that has enabled StateRAMP to continue to grow.
The value proposition that comes up is clear. We've been talking about this. The reciprocity has been one of the hardest things to get folks to kind of, hey, you got cleared in Arizona, but New York will trust you. Are you seeing the reciprocity? And Joe, maybe lead us off on this one from a supplier perspective. Are you seeing reciprocity starting to pick up? Is it something that folks are getting more comfortable with? Because I know it's a struggle in the feds.
Well, I would add that even the word reciprocity is a hard thing to adopt or accept, but then in instituting it is even a greater challenge. We have a great relationship with the FedRAMP office, and we have a fast track if you are FedRAMP authorized into StateRAMP. And I would argue we have a great relationship with the states in their supply base coming into StateRAMP as well. The challenge, though, is that it's funding, it's resources, it's people. There's a labor shortage. And so I think even with the best of intent that states may have in implementing a RAMP program, the challenge is the systems, the policies, the people, the continuous monitoring. And that's where a shared services model from an adoption standpoint, reciprocity perspective, it is favoring StateRAMP for state governments to use.
I just want to jump in real quick because I'm not familiar with the fast track program. Maybe go through it real quick because I think a lot of suppliers would be interested because, well, I sell to states, or I could sell to states.
Sure. So if you are FedRAMP ready or authorized, we can take advantage of all of your information and processes. And I think the turnaround time is weeks, not months, to become StateRAMP authorized. And so that's been a highly used process that we've built out with the cooperation of the FedRAMP office. So I'm reluctant to say how many of the suppliers. We have over 400.
Because you know I was going to ask.
Right.
You knew that.
So we have over 400 products that are going through various stages of StateRAMP, and certainly it's dozens of FedRAMP products, FedRAMP authorized products that are now StateRAMP authorized.
And one thing I want to offer is that we call it StateRAMP, but it's really not just states, right? This goes all the way down to the local and municipal level. And I'll tell you that I see the same problem we saw the same problem, I'll say within my own state, right? Which is, cities, counties, local municipalities, again, they're trying to get all the advantages of these, emerging technologies and the advantages of cloud solutions, but they got to solve the same problem with the data, right? So they were looking to us to say, well, who have you reviewed? And they started leveraging our list, right? Well, same thing with StateRAMP is that great value for them. And in terms of the supplier value proposition, it's not just being able to sell to states, it's being able to sell through that entire continuum down the SLED market.
And I would add to that you mentioned correctly so data a couple of times here. And when we first got together back in 2020, that was the risk and the challenge was data breaches. Fast forward 4 years and it's ransomware. So to the point of the local, the RMCs, the clean water systems and so forth, we're now faced with adversaries that are trying to harm us physically. And so data is important, but continuously delivering services as a government organization is equally as critical, safely, I would add.
Years ago, I was lucky enough to sit at a press roundtable with the former head of the Office of National Director for Intelligence, and he talked about disruption. And this is when everything was just around being, attacks to take down, like DDoS attacks, not really disruptive, but like true disruption, malicious. And he talked about this, and we were all like, no, that's so far away. And when you bring up ransomware, I always think of that press conference, and he saw the future well. And I think that's a great segue to talk a little bit about the state and local side. When you said, the municipalities, the local governments are really looking more at StateRAMP and what it provides. How are you guys going to them as well? How are you ensuring that they know and understand and hey, you guys do exist, that you can help?
Well, I think there's great outreach efforts by the StateRAMP team. They're reaching out to, I'll say, all the associations and getting to the local level. And I think they've done a great job of, we see a lot of participation in our steering committee. So we've got folks from counties and cities and different municipalities that have joined in there. And so being connected to, I'll say, their communities of practice, that's kind of the key thing. We love to share information with each other at the state and local level about what's working.
And StateRAMP is a 501c6, and so to educate all of SLED, state local education, I think from a membership and certainly from a contact, we have over 40,000 individuals that are receiving communications from StateRAMP, and that is entirely based and driven by we need to provide educational materials, information, timely information, accurate information, and so we are continuing as an organization to expand that outreach.
And Jared, as you talk to cities and towns within Arizona, as an example, as I imagine you do, you're not just in some high chair that you're pointing down at people, but as you go and talk to others, how much does StateRAMP come up? How much are people asking, hey, we're trying to digitize this service to provide, for people to pay their water bills or to pay their trash collection bills.
Right.
And it's a good program, but we could make it better. Or how much does that come up in those conversations? Is whether StateRAMP or just the broader digitization?
So as part of any digitization conversation and the adoption of emerging technologies, it's how do we secure it, right? So being able to have a pre-vetted list of suppliers, and then one of the things in Arizona is we have a lot of cooperative contracts that are good value and get leveraged at the state and local or at the local level. And so for them to know that those cooperative contracts, many of those now have StateRAMP language incorporated into them, so that the vendors that are awarded under those contracts will already be bringing solutions that are secured.
Cooperative contracts, just give me a quick 30 seconds in case the folks aren't familiar with that term.
Sure. So a cooperative contract is a contract that's negotiated at the state level, but includes language that allows the locals to take advantage of it. And then the state gets a little bit of a return on whatever they spend on that contract for our work in maintaining and administrating it.
I compare it to the GSA on a federal level.
Thank you. I think it's a term that we've definitely heard of, but I think it's just helpful to folks. And I'm glad you brought up procurement, because that's another big initiative around that StateRAMP is working on, the Procurement Best Practices Initiative. Let's start with what it is and what some of the goals are. Joe, you want to lead us off?
Sure, happy to, because that is, I think, the initial conversation that JR and I had is we have IT and cybersecurity that have expressed concerns over the state of our cybersecurity posture throughout the country, and then procurement, who has a driving force to procure best value solutions. But that doesn't necessarily translate when there's not policy, there's not education, there's not understanding of what is risk, what is true risk. And so working with NASPO, StateRAMP organization has developed a best practices document that helps to address the policies, the contract terms, T's and C's and so forth that can be adopted. And it's both whole of state, it's federated states as well as centralized states. So state government is much like federal in that there are some federated states with a lot of different agencies, a lot of different CIOs, a lot of different procurement officials, and then there are centralized states. So the best practices tries to address all of those complexities so that states and local governments can pick and choose the T's and C's, the language that would be best for them.
And I think don't underestimate the importance of going upstream in that procurement and the whole acquisition process, because the last place that you want to be, and I can tell you because we've been there, is you've completed a procurement, you've made it an award, and now someone says, what about the security of that? And you're now trying to retrofit and find out, do I have to now unwind a whole decision process and pivot? When at that point, by the time you get through that a procurement, it's generally years in the making, and the last thing you want to do is say, okay, now we have to make a different decision.
And that's the way it has been, and that's where it is shifting very dramatically, I would argue, moving forward.
It's still surprising to me when folks don't think about security on the front end. And JR, from a CIO's perspective, I'm sure as soon as you're brought into a discussion around a procurement, buying something, updating something, the security, you hopefully are driving part of that conversation.
Yeah.
But given what we've seen over the last 5-7 years with the ransomware attacks, with the data breaches, is it just not top of mind for folks because they're not security people, even though we seem to be surrounded by your data's been breached, my data's been breached, all our data. We were told, I think Google tells me every day to change my password somewhere, So it's this constant feed of security. What's the disconnect happening that this maybe procurement initiative is helping to shorten?
Sure. So I think that, and probably less so today than 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? Now that the business is starting to hear, and I think all the points that you made, there's our daily lives are now being inundated by the importance of our own individual cybersecurity hygiene. And so people are starting to think about, what about the solution that I'm buying? But that hasn't been a part of their business requirements. They're thinking about, I need to get the business outcome. I'm going to put an RFP together that has all my requirements. And typically there'll be a section in there about, security. But they're focused more on the business outcomes, right? And so they want if it doesn't meet the business outcomes, being secure doesn't matter so much to them, which is not to say it's not important. But I think there's a certain amount of they assume that's going to be part of the solution, and they do look to the IT and the cybersecurity teams to ensure that that's happening. Our job is to help them understand we want to make sure you start, we'll say it's there by design, not by retrofit.
And I think that's really where StateRAMP does come in, because there are resource constraints. Procurement doesn't staff a team of cybersecurity experts or procurement cybersecurity experts. And so writing language, but then assessing RFP responses do they meet them? And then continuously monitoring throughout the contract term, are they still meeting them? And that is the challenge, I think, in all of government, federal, state, and local. And that's where a shared services like StateRAMP, and I think a key reason why StateRAMP has grown and will continue to moving forward. And then I would also add a key distinction with StateRAMP is, what if no vendor meets the requirements? Does government shut down? And so what we have developed with StateRAMP organization is a progressing snapshot, a gap analysis, acknowledging that maybe not any vendor meets it today, but who is the closest and which best provider or solution has a path toward meeting it over some duration of time.
The old poem, right?
That's it.
Yes.
They continue to okay, you're 80%, how do you get to closer to 100%? And this is the path. In the last minute or so we have together, we've talked a lot about kind of the impact of StateRAMP has been so far. As you look into 2025 and beyond, what are some of those priorities that for StateRAMP and for the more broader, I guess, community around security? JR?
So from my perspective, as I look at it, we have, I'll say, a lot of the large providers to state and local government that are already, I'll say, in the fold and are participating. It's going to be getting to I think the mediums and smalls, those that, I'll say haven't traditionally maybe undergone some of the security reviews, yet they know they need to do it. And so I think for the challenge and the opportunity for StateRAMP is to make sure that our programs sort of meet them where they are and can help bring them along that continuum. Because at the end of the day, whether you're a small provider that works with smaller licensing boards and commissions, you're still holding some very sensitive data when we're talking about things like medical records and nursing and licensing. So they've got to meet really the same requirements as the folks that are handling our Medicaid data, right?
From a private sector perspective, StateRAMP is working with organizations that will help the SMB community. The biggest impediment that has been so far is it's so expensive, why start? I can't afford it. And so how do we break down that impediment, that impression? And then secondly, how do we facilitate the stepping stone process toward meeting that requirement? And so we've got some partnerships that we think are going to really help, because it comes down to trust. Do I trust this consulting organization, or do I trust that provider of a technology? And so to build out a trusted ecosystem, much like StateRAMP is a trusted ecosystem for government, having a trusted ecosystem for the small and medium-sized businesses and the local education organizations to turn to say, this is a proven provider of these services, and here is a cost structure that will enable them to begin that process. And that's what we'll see in 2025 and moving forward.
We could spend a whole entire discussion here on cost of FedRAMP and StateRAMP. I know there's a lot of frustration. I know folks are trying to, how can we bring down costs? And I think that's part of the cyber harmonization discussion that I'll have later today with some folks from the White House. But Joe and JR, thank you so much for your time. Joe Bielawski is the President of Knowledge Services. JR Sloan is the CIO of the state of Arizona, and you both are co-founders of the StateRAMP program. Again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.